Today, many people believe all meat production is environmentally destructive.
The world knows that livestock are causing desertification. All the vegans, the celebrities, the anti-meat, they know this for certain.
But animals are not inherently destructive, though the way we raise most of them today is.
We began to use antibiotics, not just to treat a sick animal, but they began to be added to the daily feed.
Fattening them up with, again, beta agonists and antibiotics.
It really shifted the natural limits on how many animals you might have had in a building.
Faster, cheaper.
Today, most meat comes from factory farms, but they are not the only way to produce meat.
One of the arguments that the anti-meat people make is that cattle are destroying the earth. Cattle that are raised industrially are damaging our ecosystem. Yep, agreed. But ruminant animals were an essential part of the evolution of this earth. The ecosystem depends on it.
And when animals are properly managed, they restore rather than destroy the ecosystem.
Thousands of farmers, they're talking about improving the soil health by different management of their livestock on that land, better profitability, higher stocking rates, as in more animals on the land, but you're treating them differently. So this is evidence which is all around us.
Without livestock and this particular planning process, we cannot solve this world.
So in this video, we will explore why knowing where your meat comes from is important and how you can identify meat that improves human and planetary health. I think you can agree it's time we rethink meat and the way we raise it.
Cattle are managed well.
Mimic nature.
Soil health is your health.
Actually healing the earth.
Increase in biodiversity.
Put our cattle back out on pasture.
When you walk into a grocery store today, almost all animal products come from factory farms.
A lot of people have estimated that over 90% of the pigs and chickens and turkeys are now raised in this way.
In factory farms, the problems are numerous. Crowded conditions, gestation crates, calves separated from their mother within hours of birth, painful procedures like tail docking and beak clipping with no anesthesia, and millions of animals euthanized annually that don't fit our efficient production systems.
There's some pretty horrible practices out, suffocation of animals in houses, taking weaner calves right off of the mother and putting them into feedlot, literally having lesions in their esophagus from going straight to the corn feed from milk and grass. We have to do better with how we manage animals and livestock. And those animals deserve that respect.
Now, despite the major issues with many factory farms, it's important to acknowledge that there are ranchers raising animals in ethical and environmentally supportive ways. But before we discuss that, let's explore the unfortunate reality of our industrialized system, in the words of regenerative rancher and researcher Dr. Alan Williams.
If you examine agriculture today, our soil is a lot worse. Our animals are not healthier. They're more reliant on all these external inputs to keep them healthy. Our ecosystems have been steadily diminishing. Humans, we are becoming less and less healthy. Farm debt is the highest it's ever been. So how in the world have we made things better?
Historically, animals were raised in integrated, pasture-based systems. However, several advances in the 1900s led to dramatic changes and a prioritization of efficiency over ecology.
Are sent to the feedlots of the Corn Belt for fattening.
Other aspects of the antibiotic industry, growth acceleration, small amounts added to the feed. This one has been on a diet which included an antibiotic. It's a difference in size, it's much larger.
Inoculation prevents diseases that at one time seriously crippled cattle profits. A cattle feeding complex like this vast layout can be compared to a factory production line, with the end product being beef.
The market became, well, let's speed it up. They found that if they fed the animals grain, they could shorten that time from 3 years to 2 years.
Though today, a 1,200-pound steer can be produced in 14 months with grain feeding, cattle before 1850 consumed mostly grass and were harvested between 4 and 5 years.
Cattle on corn produced more flavor because it would put fat on the animal.
Widespread consolidation has also created a system where 4 multinational companies control approximately 85% of the beef market. According to politician and environmental lawyer Robert F. Kennedy, the rise in pork factory farms in Iowa put at least 45,000 family farmers out of business. This system also means razor-thin margins and a hard life for farmers, which might be why they have high rates of suicide. Factory farms also undermine human health and environmental health in at least 6 important ways. First is the fact that about 80% of the antibiotics used worldwide are used in animal production, which increases the risk of antibiotic resistance, an enormous issue discussed by New York Times bestselling author Dr. Mark Hyman.
You know, there's about 30 million pounds of antibiotics used annually in America, and 29 million are used for animals, not for treating disease, but for preventing infection. Like, that's a disaster. That's creating antibiotic resistance globally. That kills 700,000 people a year. It's like, imagine giving antibiotic to every school kid every year to prevent them getting strep. Well, that's a dumb way to treat people. It's the same thing with animals.
If we continue to abuse antibiotics, we could see a day where a simple infection or routine procedure is no longer safe. Second, factory farms are also a source of novel pathogens and outbreaks that can spread quickly through cramped conditions and infect humans. MRSA, for example, is a bacterial infection that kills over 11,000 Americans annually, and bird flu strains like H5N1 present a terrifying pandemic risk due to their ability to mutate. Third, ractopamine, an additives used in pigs today, is also banned in 160 countries and potentially dangerous, as discussed by regenerative pig farmer John Arbuckle.
The whole ractopamine thing is very scary. I think the reason for giving them a synthetic version of adrenaline is to make them so amped up that their only release of energy is to eat. Whatever your food consumed, whatever those animals bioaccumulated, you're going to be taking that in.
Other chemicals, growth promotants, and hormones can also be a concern.
We're giving animals bovine growth hormone and estrogen. I mean, actually use DES, which is banned in humans because it causes birth defects. Estrogen makes you soft and round and plump, which is what we want for our animals. That's not necessarily good for us.
One report also linked an estrogen used in livestock with early puberty. A recent analysis by Zen Honeycutt from the non-for-profit Moms Across America also revealed detectable levels of several veterinary drugs and hormones in fast food meats. Number 4, the pesticides used to grow corn and soy fed to animals also have a number of deleterious consequences and were originally created as weapons of war during World War II. Director of the Bionutrient Food Association, Dan Kittredge, shares why this happened.
Certainly, post-World War II, there was a lot of companies that were able to make the ingredients for explosives and chemical weapons that they didn't have a market for anymore, and so they decided to have farmers be their market.
The chemical preparations are used to kill insects and to change the growth
causing
of plants.
modification and breakdown of its parts, gradual but certain
Kill
death.
warm bloods and cold bloods alike.
The concern of these laboratories is to find out how poisonous these pesticides are.
Aerial dusting and spraying has become a specialized field combining agriculture and
To
aviation.
determine the average daily consumption of pesticide contained in
Agricultural
the
chemicals
food.
is approaching 50 million acres annually.
In 2018, nearly 1/4 billion pounds of herbicides and insecticides were applied to the corn and soybean used for farmed animal feed. Millions of pounds of pesticides are also used in the United States, which are banned in other countries due to safety concerns, and 72 million birds are estimated to be killed every year in the United States alone by pesticides that also harm dozens of endangered animals. One of the most prevalent herbicides used today, glyphosate, may also be dangerous to humans, according to MIT research scientist Dr. Stephanie Seneff.
So they were using it to clean pipes, actually, to remove metals from pipes. And they found out it was a fantastic herbicide. As I said, it kills everything. So to think that it kills all plants and is harmless to humans is a bit foolhardy, in my opinion.
Groundskeeper for Benicia Unified School District in California, Dwayne Lee Johnson was regularly exposed to glyphosate.
They used to push that narrative that it's safe enough to drink. What happened, the holes that the chemical comes out of became detached from the tank. It started to basically make like a fountain of this herbicide, and then got all over me.
Following the incident, Johnson noticed a lesion on his knee and saw a doctor.
To the doctors, determined that I had lymphoma. After that spot on my knee, I got more spots, and it got worse and worse.
After losing his job due to the need for treatment, Dwayne decided to sue Monsanto.
I had people that begged me not to do this because of how powerful they are.
I am in a fight with the monster, but I did not die. I am in a fight with the monster, but I'm still alive. Yo.
The jury determined his glyphosate exposure from Ranger Pro led to his terminal cancer diagnosis, and Dwayne was initially awarded $289 million, which was later reduced in appeals.
I don't want to be the poster boy for herbicide and people being exposed and getting cancer from this. My only thing that I ever wanted from Monsanto is that they changed the label.
Research by the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer concluded that glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to humans, and studies have found that it may cause DNA damage and increase the risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And today, many farmers are regularly exposed to glyphosate. It is sprayed on several crops used in animal feed, residues are detected in our meat products, and it also ends up in our water.
Once it gets in the water, it doesn't stop. It just keeps poisoning things.
And John Arbuckle, a 9th-generation farmer, also had this to say about his father's decline following his regular exposure to farm chemicals.
We don't exactly know how he contracted Parkinson's, but there's 111 independent processes and studies that demonstrate a link between the use of glyphosate and Parkinson's. So unfortunately, he just passed away recently. It was a result of complications due to Parkinson's, which I, in my heart, believe came from using these chemicals.
As of May 2022, Monsanto paid out over $11 billion to settle over 100,000 Roundup lawsuits. Despite these risks, glyphosate is still widely used today, and experts like soil scientist Jessica Chiartis worry that the combination of the chemicals used today may be far more dangerous than any one alone.
We test one thing in isolation. We don't test what's called the concomitant effects. So when you start combining these things, maybe this one pesticide is fine to use in isolation, but then when you combine it with a suite of others, or with the herbicides and the fungicides, we haven't studied this. We're starting to see health effects in rural communities where we used to see that farm kids were healthier because they were out in nature and breathing, cleaner air. And now we're starting to see more health issues popping up in rural communities.
And number 5, factory farms produce up to 1.6 million tons of manure every year, roughly 3 to 20 times the amount produced by humans. In pasture-based systems, manure works as fertilizer, but massive amounts of manure from factory farms can contain over 100 harmful compounds that pollute our air and our waterways and are linked to asthma and lung disease. Elevated nitrates in drinking water are also linked to infant death, cancer and miscarriage, and runoff from factory farms has created over 400 dead zones, areas where aquatic life cannot survive, one of the largest in the Gulf of Mexico. A 6th and final issue is soil degradation.
The way we're doing it now, you really focus on individual crops and individual animal species that you're raising. There's a really good body of evidence showing that these practices are contributing to the loss of soil because we don't have the animals on the land. You don't rebuild the health of the soil.
Sadly, even many farmers like regenerative rancher Gabe Brown haven't always understood how soil works.
And I have several college degrees and took soils classes. Never did they teach me about the life in the soil and how soil ecosystems function. We were taught that the soil is a chemistry set and you add N, P, and K and micronutrients and, the soil holds a plant upright. That's what it is. Well, now, I understand the nutrient cycle. I understand how soils function. It's ridiculous what we've come to in agriculture today, where we think we have to kill everything.
And though we don't often think about the importance of soil, a 2022 paper concluded that the loss of our soil is an existential threat that could negatively impact food and energy security, water resources, our ability to support a biodiverse ecosystem, and even adapt to climate change.
Soil really is the foundation of life. And if we lose our topsoil, we won't have food security. Nothing could be produced without soil. It supports our entire civilizations.
98.7% of our calories come from the soil. And today, our food is less nutritious than at any other time in history. In fact, it's been estimated you need to eat 2 servings of kale to get the same amount of calcium from 1 serving in 1950s. Geomorphologist Dr. Montgomery discusses one reason this might be happening.
Key practices we depend on: a lot of tillage, a lot of nitrogen fertilizer, a lot of agrochemicals for pesticides. Those things all disrupt soil life and the microbial partnerships that plants have with their agents in the soil.
When microbial life is destroyed, the bridge between the nutrients in the soil and the plants is broken, and the plants and animals who eat them become vulnerable and less nutritious. Unfortunately, soil today is being destroyed at an alarming rate.
There are areas where we probably don't have that many harvests left because the soil is eroding so fast.
I now tell people we're in the middle of our second dust bowl because we have massive dust storms every year now.
You look at the UN's assessment of the global state of the soil today, they project that we're losing about 1/3% of our ability to grow food each and every year. If you play that out over 100 years, it adds up to almost 1/3, about 30%.
Well, I mean, according to the UN, there may be only 60 harvests left.
Eroding faster than the rate of the natural formation of soils.
We've pretty much got this century to address the global soil degradation problem.
I think it's an existential threat.
Though factory farms began with good intentions, the unintended consequences and threats to human, animal, and planetary health make this meat unaffordable.
To be looking at this much more holistically. So if you have a system that on paper looks like, oh, inputs are cheap, yields are high, this is a good system. But if you then step back and say, but oh, wait a minute, this system is causing nitrogen pollution in the waters, or this system is causing runoff of manure, it's not an efficient practice because it's causing all of these downstream, costs, if you will.
So please tell me, under our conventional practices, how we're going to continue to feed the world. It's not going to happen. We're having more disease, we're having more pestilence, we're having more famine, we're having more drought, we're having more flood. So the only option that we have is by transitioning to regenerative if we're going to continue to feed the world.
Fortunately, there's a growing movement of regenerative farmers and ranchers who are re-embracing methods used by many indigenous cultures and the framework created by Alan Savory to grow food and heal the environment. So let's begin our exploration of regenerative agriculture with a discussion of how it's different, according to regenerative rancher Eric Perner.
You could characterize agriculture in about 3 different ways: extractive, which is typical conventional, using more than we're putting back, or sustainable, it's a break even. And then regenerative is kind of this new method, which I would say is not new. I mean, indigenous cultures have practiced regenerative for years before us. It's basically nature's way of operating. Nature by itself is regenerative.
Regenerative agriculture is not only not hurting the land, but it's making it better. According to Dr. Alan Williams, who has restored environmental function in over 4,000 locations.
It is farming and ranching in synchrony with nature and the 4 ecosystem processes to repair, rebuild, revitalize, and restore ecosystem function, starting with life beneath the soil and expanding to life above.
Regenerative agriculture is characterized by 6 guiding principles and is practiced by Gabe Brown on his ranch in Bismarck, North Dakota.
Well, number 1 is context. Every one of us has a different context. I live in North Dakota. You might live in Florida or Mexico, Hawaii, different context. Second principle, least amount of disturbance possible. By that, we mean least amount of tillage, least amount of chemicals, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides. The next principle is armor on the soil. If we see the soil, that soil is prone to wind erosion, water erosion. The next principle is diversity. You have to have diversity of plants, animals, and insects. Next principle is living root in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. Why do we have so much carbon in the atmosphere and not in the soil? It's because we're not growing things for as long as we could. And the final principle is that of animal, and I add insect integration. We have to have animals and insects out on the landscape. They're an important part of a healthy, functioning ecosystems.
Regenerative principles have also been used successfully across the globe to rehabilitate even the most degraded landscapes, like the Loess Plateau, a project involving the Chinese government and filmmaker and ecologist John Liu.
When I first went there, it was virtually no vegetation. I mean, you could stand on the top of a mountain and look in 360 degrees, and it just looked like a desert. But by 10 years, it was clear. This was absolutely transformational. You could bring back stream flows, you could have springs, you're going to get more and more animals, and you're going to have more productivity.
Though you can use regenerative practices without animals, according to many experts, animals enhance and expedite the process in many ways and may even be critical in certain environments.
Can we make progress without animals by stopping the tillage? Absolutely we can. And what I will tell you, you will always make much more rapid progress if you can incorporate animals. Always.
Land needs animals as much as flowers need bees. The land without animals is in a state of decline.
And though it is possible to degrade land with animals, rangeland ecologist Alan Savory's painful life lesson helped him understand why animals are not the heart of the problem.
The problem is management. We are causing it, then it's not livestock. It's how you manage livestock. Whether they're in feedlots or on the land, whether you're using grazing systems, rotations.
Early in Alan's career, he was taught that livestock were responsible for the widespread desertification in his home in Africa. What he learned was that when animals were removed, the environment deteriorated.
Like when the American government wanted to shoot 50,000 Navajo sheep because their sheep were causing the desertification. So they put in experimental plots and they took all the sheep out of those experimental plots, but it got worse. Same as it did when my research led to shooting 40,000 elephants. It got worse, but not a single scientist now, over 40 years later, has ever admitted to error.
Savory has since created a system called holistic management that utilizes animals in a highly managed way to restore environmental health. His system has been used by thousands of ranchers worldwide. One rancher inspired by Savory's system is the founder of Snaplands, Ryan White.
In this part of the ranch we're doing what we call adaptive planned grazing. The livestock that are over here, we're using them as a biological tool to improve the ecosystem services. These animals, they're both converting the vegetation here to fertilizer. They'll also trample it and increase the amount of germination by basically disturbing the soil surface with hoof action. The livestock went and they've covered up all that bare soil. That's going to both cool the soil surface and it's going to allow moisture to slowly seep into the soil. And that's going to be great for soil fertility. They're going to store and hold nutrients better. They're going to sequester carbon.
In fact, I began to realize we're only going to solve this with livestock, and that's proved correct.
We're grazing regeneratively. We are setting in motion this entire series of positive compounding effects that start with life beneath the soil, and we're restoring intact ecosystems. If we remove these grazing, browsing, foraging animals from our landscape, then we've got a whole bunch of other ecosystems that are going to collapse.
One of the most powerful benefits of regenerative practices is the ability to improve water security.
Water supplies becoming critical. We have to realize that practices we use on our farm and ranch directly affect how much water can infiltrate into the soil and how much can be stored in that soil.
I was surprised to learn that we don't necessarily need more water, but more water the soil can hold. According to retired grazing specialist Dr. Teague,
infiltration is controlled by biology. There is nothing you can put on there that's going to improve the infiltration. You've got to manage so the right fungi in particular and other little microbes, bacteria, etc., are present.
This microbiology that drives everything lives in and on thin films of water in the pore spaces between soil aggregates.
If you kill them, you've got a tennis court out there. It doesn't go in the ground.
And these are not small amounts of water. According to author of Water in Plain Sight, Judith Schwartz.
So the USDA did research, and for every 1% increase organic carbon in the soil, that means an additional 20 to 25,000 gallons of water per acre that can be held on the soil.
So back when we bought this ranch, we could hold, about 35,000 gallons of water per acre. Well, now I have lands that can hold 160,000.
Alejandro Carrillo, a regenerative rancher in the largest desert in North America, the Chihuahuan Desert, has also healed his water cycle so successfully that his neighbors have accused him of stealing the rain.
We're practicing holistic management to mimic nature, to mimic the movement of what the bison used to do. Even though we say that it's a Chihuahuan desert, it should be really desert grassland. The other thing that is happening, out of 100% of precipitation that we got in our properties, 60% is coming from the sea, and 40% is precipitation that really needs to come up from inland. For example, last year, instead of 9, we get 12. So we're getting 1 or 2 extra inches, and in the desert is a big difference. But in order for nature to create that precipitation, we need vegetation.
A second important benefit is carbon sequestration. Most climate scientists agree that rising levels of atmospheric carbon are problematic. But what most people don't realize is that according to distinguished soil scientist Rattan Lal, much of that carbon has been released from the soil.
Since the beginning of agriculture, land use conversion and cultivation and soil may have contributed as much as 600 gigaton of carbon into the atmosphere.
Research has also revealed regenerative practices, especially involving animals, can put carbon back in the soil where it belongs.
These plants are what is holding the soil structure intact, and it's also feeding the biological community here. And by doing that, we're creating more complex stores of carbon. A lot of this western wheatgrass has been clipped off, which will stimulate that plant. That production has a direct correlation to the amount of carbon it's going to be sequestering over time, and the symbiotic relationship that all these grasses have with ungulates throughout the world.
Research by Dr. Teague has demonstrated that the amount of carbon sequestered will vary depending on management and even location.
We do it in many locations under different farms because every farm is different. Every soil is different.
And while some have suggested the carbon sequestration may be temporary, Dr. Teague's research has shown otherwise.
We got some of the best scientists, soil scientists in the world, and they found that most of it was the long-term carbon that was being actually increased, which is superb because that's exactly what we want. So that was really a good finding.
Through our regenerative grazing, we had been sequestering a little more than 7 tons of carbon per acre annually. Trees can't touch that. Row crops can't even come close to it. The only thing that can do that and sequester that much carbon is perennial pasture being grazed regeneratively by livestock. There's no other way we can sequester that much carbon.
In other words, regeneratively raised grass-fed beef can be an environmentally beneficial food, which was demonstrated in a 2018 analysis by Professor of Animal Science at Michigan State, Dr. Jason Roundtree, exploring the benefits of a certain type of grazing called AMP grazing.
Basically compared a grain-fed versus a grass-fed model. So what we found then is that in our 5 years of doing this, that we effectively found enough sequestration to offset the entire grass-fed footprint.
But not all grazing is the same. Some grazing, like continuous grazing, can cause damage. Yet the highly managed systems created by Alan Savory and studied by Dr. Teague, also known as holistic management and AMP grazing, consistently result in measurable and powerful benefits. So what is AMP grazing?
That means grazing for a short period of time, stocking at a level where you have enough to feed the animals, but also provide all the ecosystem functions, not just make the ecosystem work, but to improve it.
And while no one knows exactly how much carbon regenerative practices could sequester, experts, including the founder of Soil for Climate, Seth Itzkon, are extremely hopeful.
Many of the conventional estimates are based on a 30-centimeter soil sample, but healthy perennial grassland soils can be a meter deep or more. So when we start looking at regenerative grazing and when we start taking deeper soil samples, we see that the potential for drawdown globally can be much greater than is commonly estimated. And so regenerative grazing is simply an essential part of reversing global warming.
If we can implement regenerative principles and practices on at least 40% of our agronomic landscape, then we would basically eliminate our carbon issue.
And when carbon stores are increased and animals are present and water is plentiful, it creates the conditions for an explosion of life.
Soil is a storehouse habitat for 25% of all biodiversity in the world is in soil.
Experts estimate we've lost 60% of species biodiversity in the last 40 years, and soil is the foundation of it all. One final benefit is farmer livelihood. Today, farmers only make 8 cents on every dollar.
Very few farms and ranches are actually making a living at this. Like it's usually a side job of some sort.
Fortunately, regenerative methods and mindsets can significantly increase profits.
If I compare myself to my neighbors all around me, okay, we're growing 3 to 4 times the forage biomass on every acre that our neighbors are. And we're doing it without buying the fertilizer and the chemicals that they're buying. So my neighbors would graze only cattle, and they wouldn't be able to run any more cattle than we run on a per acre basis. But on those same acres that we're running the same number of cattle per acre that they are, we're also running sheep, we're running pastured pigs, we're running broilers, we're running laying hens. So we're generating a lot more food per acre, 3 to 4 times more food per acre.
As a result, farmers young and old are once again excited about agriculture.
When I was able to shift my management practices in such a fashion as to have my plants be healthy, then my yield went up and my cost of production went down and pests and diseases were gone and I was making money.
You know, my son's 35 years old and he's never borrowed a penny. He operates on cash and he's able to do that because it can be profitable.
I went from having 3 or 4 minimum wage employees to today got 180 something employees that make well over the county average.
I want to be that beacon of light. You can make a living in farming and ranching. We just got to think a little differently.
As you can see, the environmental consequences of factory farms and regenerative agriculture could not be more different.
The industrial factory farm model breaks the cycles of nature. The cycles of nature would be the water cycle, the mineral cycle, the energy cycle, the microbial cycle, the carbon cycle. Regenerative agriculture, to me, is restarting the cycles of nature.
The narrative that we shouldn't be eating meat or should be eating fake meat is based on a lack of understanding of regenerative grazing and the need to restore soil to mitigate, if not reverse, global warming.
We don't have to destroy nature in order to create food for humans.
Which means you do not need to give up meat to save the planet, you just need to know where it came from.
Meat is the food of the future. Most of the world's agricultural land that is in annual grain or some type of other annual crop will have to be converted back to perennial grasslands, perennial pasture.
In conclusion, I hope it's become clear that the way we raise meat is one of the most important issues of our time.
That the health of soil, plants, animal, people, environment, and the planet is one and indivisible.
So as consumers, we have to remember that the meat we buy determines how meat is produced.
There are regenerative ways to use animals.
We need more small producers. Each doing what's right for its spot.
This is the type of meat you want to eat.
Just like we upgrade our light bulbs and our vehicles, we need to upgrade our meat and create systems where regeneratively raised food is available to everyone.
We can't ignore what's happening. If we do nothing, it gets worse. If we do restoration, then we have a chance. We have a window of opportunity. And it's our responsibility to do this for our children, for future generations.
You get 3 votes every day as to what you will tolerate in the food system: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And by supporting regenerative agriculture, you help ensure that we rebuild our soil and that future generations inherit a healthy planet and continue to grow nutritious food. Essentially, regeneration starts with you. Thank you for watching Rethink Meat. I sincerely hope it inspires you to embrace your power and become part of the transformation our meat industry and planet desperately need.